using the property still. That is why we have this glorious example of a car here. We feel like they use this as a contraband car to train the dogs. Just a side note, they have both narcotic sniffing dogs and bomb sniffing dogs being trained here. So I was telling the first group, when I was driving here, I was nervous because they do tactical practices here too, and like surrounding cities will come. And I'm like, oh, this is the day. Like, they're gonna have the SWAT tactical vehicles out, and it's just. So luckily, we reserved this pavilion per se.
As far as you know, when will the park be open to the people?
That's a very difficult question, one that I don't know the answer to. I will say, as of now, it'll be very hard to just open it up. If you look over here where the dormitories used to stay, and that's represented on this map here, they were taken down. We're going to jump a little bit because of the question. I'll jump around a little bit. They were taken down. Archaeologists were monitoring that demolition, but the foundations were left. The foundations were left because the contractor working at that time, we wanted him to take his time removing the foundations, and that wasn't an option at that time, so we just said leave the foundations in place. Along with the foundations that are left there, there is some razor wire that has been left, and that has been overgrown with weeds. So it's hidden razor wire in those bushes.
Nice.
So in terms of just opening up this property, that's going to be very hard initially because it is still used by the police force and City of Newport News as a building services storage for their vehicles, if you notice that as well. So to get it just fully opened, it'll probably take some time if that's what the city decides to do with it. Just for logistical reasons of safety. There was a basement to that city.
If that's what the city decides to do, it's been designated parkland.
Again,
is there anything that makes you think the city's not going to live up to that?
I have heard nothing.
Okay, thank you.
I have heard nothing, and I stay out of that conversation for exactly this reason.
Thank you.
Before this investigation took place, I had a nice, comfy job under the radar. Under the radar. This has come up. I am more in the forefront. More people know of me, and that has been good, and that has been challenging. I won't say bad, challenging. But no, in terms of future, I know nothing. I have my own opinions, as does everyone else, but the city government works, city council will make a decision, and we are trying to provide them with as much information as possible about the archaeology that is present.
But if there's enough here to make it historical site, then they really can't develop it. True?
Untrue. The laws of Virginia is a property owner land right state. If you own property and say there's an earthwork on it and you choose to demolish that, that's your choice as the landowner. And so that's the state in which we live in. Now, knowing that it is a city municipality where we elect our government officials and we have a voice in our city democracy to go voice our opinions, hopefully whatever the citizens generally feel, the city council will take that into consideration. Along those lines, if we can just kind of go into that right now, I feel that the City Council has been very providing in terms of reaching out and trying to get the history of Newport News. The fact that I am on staff with Newport News, how many municipalities staff an archaeologist. So we'd have to give credit to City Council for the things they have done and have shown in historical favor. They've been doing archaeological investigations on this property since the late 90s, and that's well before my time. I came to the city in 2005, So I think there's a dedication from City Council to be aware of this. They have a tough decision ahead, and we're just trying to provide them with all the historical, archaeological information so they can make a proper decision.
My grandfather worked on this property when it was a working farm in the 20s and 30s.
Yeah.
And the rest of my family lived in Newport News, and I remember my mother telling stories of how my grandmother would cook all this food, and it would take them all day to get up here to bring my grandfather food to last him for 2 weeks. Even though they had plenty of food, it was her food. And they would come up and have lemonade or coffee or whatever in the brick house with him. And then in the afternoon, because it took so long to get back, they would leave, and he had a week off once a month, and he could go home.
And now you're going to tell me he took all these photographs of the area back
No,
then. No. on! That is what I need.
I wish, but I haven't found any in anything, you know, that was left to me.
Well, that's a great example of the history of Newport News right here, and the spanning occupancy of this property. I mean, pre-contact Native Americans were here, utilizing the property for fishing and game. Although we haven't found site specific to pre-contact Native Americans, we have found projectile points and pottery dating from back then. So you can see this was a unique piece of property that was utilized by, you know, humans for a long, long time. But getting back to that, from the archaeology that was done in the late 90s, it provided us information on 3 sites that were located on the property. Now, it might be a little shaky in the wind, but...
Can you point where we are?
We are right here.
Thank you.
Off this purple building, which represents...
Let me hold this, and then you can...
The purple square represents the gymnasium behind me or to my left. That's indicated in purple because during that time, I think it was built in the late 90s, maybe 2000, archaeology was performed on the footprint of this building, clearing it of anything significant. So
take a look. You can't see the details from...
When we did build that building, archaeology was done, as well as up here at the cell phone tower. That was done as well. Before anything was built, archaeology was done on those 2 areas. Before that, when we're talking about the main prison facilities that were built, say 1920s and around then, unfortunately they did not do the archaeology before they built the buildings. And that is why we are kind of leaving the foundation in hopes that when it does come up in a controlled manner, we'll be able to get some data, some evidence from that. Maybe something is disturbed, but...
Where was the barn in this picture?
The barn is represented in red. So the barn was taken down.
Don't remind us.
I know it. Those of us who live around here.
The barn was taken down. I will say it needed extensive repairs of a quality artisan craftsman because those beams were wood and they were concave and curved. So as much as it's a disappointment we could not save the barn, it was an extensive, expensive endeavor, and the Yoder barn is almost an exact copy or similar architectural manner. So those factors came into play, and that was part of the reason the barn was decided to be taken down.
In what area have you found the most significant historic?
Well, that's opinion, right? But no, you can kind of see that these sites were identified during previous archaeological studies. The slashes indicate high areas of activity, archaeological artifacts being uncovered and or archaeological features. Feature meaning a foundation, a post hole, a latrine built, anything where someone has disturbed the ground and create a man-made kind of structure or something that will help a man out or a woman. And so that's usually what we call an archaeological feature. So through this, when we went into our investigation that is more recent into the 2017-2018 archaeological investigation out here, this was the stuff we based our locations we chose off of. Previous archaeological work and historical documentation. So when that 2018 survey started, we had the GPR, the ground penetrating radar, used, and we also had a magnetic survey of the ground also done. And that was all recorded. Through those findings, we designated areas we wanted to excavate and explore. It's just a time saver. I mentioned before in the earlier group, like there was some stuff out here that we noticed through the GPR results, but when we look back at aerial photography from the 50s, we see barns there. So we didn't choose to explore that abnormality because we had evidence to suggest it was a 1950s barn. So that was how these areas that we're going to kind of look at, how those were chosen. Again, the front field, which we see right here, which you kind of drove in or walked in, it's where the gate was. That site was dug. There was a Civil War component there. I've been working on it this summer. Unfortunately, it's filled with water now, and I did not have time to pump it out, and then once I pump it out, it's just a mucky, muddy mess. and we won't be able to showcase that, unfortunately. We do have some artifacts that came from that dig, and they're over there at the end of the tour. We'll show those. But out there is a Civil War component and a domestic component as well. We didn't find much of a 17th century component out there in that front field site. Couple artifacts, but nothing consistent to tie it to Warwick town. Over here is where we found most our 17th century artifacts that relate to Warwick town. If you'll notice, there's a large area that has been built, developed, or parking lot. The parking lot and the buildings, besides the foundations where they're obviously still standing, that was GPR done as well. A lot of utilities under here, but not much in substantial foundations or anything like that. So the parking lot was deemed somewhat clear. Now when they remove the parking lot, I would like to be here to look, because GPR won't show artifact scatter, some smaller stuff. It's just giving you a general idea of abnormalities in the ground.
So, of these green